back when I did a movie battle on Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet versus Moulin Rouge, and how I said I wanted a Romeo and Juliet adaptation that focused on the hatred of the two sides rather than just the romance. Well, little did I know that it actually came from a musical adaptation.
West Side Story has been known as a classic from both the musical world and the film world, but yet it was a project that was very on and off. Choreographer Jerome Robbins, composer Leonard Bernstein, and book writer Arthur Lawrence wanted to create a modern version of the famous Shakespeare play, but was originally called East Side Story, where the two gangs were Irish Catholic and Jewish. But the music felt too familiar, and so it was eventually scrapped. However, a Latin beat sounded a bit more interesting, so they changed the Jewish family to Puerto Rican immigrants, and soon changed the Irish Catholic to Polish descent. And the title was changed to West Side Story, with lyricist Stephen Sondheim now with the project. While critics were mixed but mostly optimistic, the movie adaptation, directed by Robert Wise, was praised and won 10 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. The main goal, as far as the writing, was to stay true to Romeo and Juliet, while trying to make it modern, for the 50s anyway.
I guess the best way to talk about this musical is to compare it to William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, not because it's the inspiration, but because of how faithful it is.
The story pretty much is the same, with a few changes of course, as two sides are at war with each other, and a man from one side, in this case Tony, and a woman from the other side named Maria.
Don't sing the song, I know it's catchy as hell, but seriously do not sing the song.
Fall madly in love. A fight, however, break out where two characters are killed. Instead of Mercutio and Tybalt, it's Rith and Bernardo. The lovers spend a night together, there's a misunderstanding, and our leading man...
I'm sure you know what happens at the end of the play, but I guess I should say spoilers!
Dies, but in this version our leading lady lives, which is probably the biggest difference, but I'll get to that part later. So apart from the main story being similar and characters representing the original play, there are more references to the play, such as the balcony scene, now seen as a city fire exit. Maria expected to marry Gino like Juliet is to marry Paris. The lovers meeting at a dance, and that Bernardo notices, motivating the rumble, much like how Tybalt spies Romeo and therefore requests a challenge with him. The fact that the song Tonight, with lyrics such as "O moon, grow bright and make this endless day, endless night," sounds like Juliet's monologue, "Come, gentle night, come, loving black-browed night, give me my Romeo." The song Maria reminds me of the monologue from the balcony scene, "Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo?" There are more connections to the play, but certain alterations that work, and in some cases makes it better.
Am I saying that it's better than something that was written by William Shakespeare? Well, I mean that for a modern audience.
I guess the best example I can give is the marriage scene. Romeo and Juliet, within only a few hours of knowing each other, get married, and for me personally, I never got behind it. Although maybe it was just displaying their youthful nature rebelling against authority. In West Side Story, though, our lovers fantasize meeting each other's parents and getting married in the song One Hand, One Heart. I always find that scene bittersweet, as well as, well, it's sweet, but also it's tragic, as they know the world that they live in would not accept their union, and so all they can do is fantasize about it.
Going back to what I said about youth is a theme in both Romeo and Juliet and West Side Story. This comes from the adult authority figures, and while Romeo and Juliet have more authority from their parents, the gangs from West Side Story have the cops.
You can make the argument that the cops represent the prince character from the play, but that's the only authority figure. The only other adult character is Doc, who could be seen as Friar Lawrence, as he wants the feud to stop, but doesn't have that much authority on the gangs. But much like the authority in Romeo and Juliet, they show as much hate as the gangs, and therefore does not show proper guidance for the younger characters. The best scene that displays this is when the gangs are having their war council. The lieutenant interrupts and kicks out the sharks, which shows, of course, discrimination against Puerto Ricans, but then, at the same time, tries to get information out of the Jets by exploiting their weaknesses and mocking them, so no good example on both gangs, but instead displaying more hatred.
In Romeo and Juliet, the lack of guidance comes from not just the prince, but from their families, their parents, especially Juliet's, expecting her to obey their every demand, which leads to the next theme, which is women.
Of course, in Elizabethan times, women were expected to obey their parents, even if it ended up them doing not exactly what they wanted to, as all that they were expected to was to be married and have children. Even though women were not allowed to perform on stage and instead young boys would play female characters, Shakespeare actually wrote very interesting and sometimes strong women, such as Lady Macbeth. And he would break the mold of society so his female characters would have more freedom, which mostly resulted in them cross-dressing, including Rosalind from As You Like It and Viola from Twelfth Night, so they could get away from the normal society. And yes, this can come from Juliet as well. When she is expected to obey her parents and marry Paris, she distances herself from her family and even her nurse, despite their close relationship, and decides to take matters into her own hands, taking the potion to fake her death. In West Side Story, there's a lot of expectation from women knowing their place, such as the sharp girl staying at home and work, especially with Maria, as well as for her to marry Gino. With the Jets, the character Anybody's wants to be part of the gang, but they don't let her because, well, she's a girl.
Both Romeo and Juliet and West Side Story explores the themes of youth and women and what society expects them to be. But in West Side Story, it explores an additional theme, which, to me, is cultural differences.
The musical shows these differences through music and dance, which can be seen at the dance at the gym when both gangs are present, but you can also compare the Jets' song Cool and the Sharks' song America. In fact, the song America is how the American culture treats the Puerto Ricans, but yet in the movie adaptation, it's a debate on how the Sharks would rather return home, while the girls prefer their life in America. When the film was released, many critics at the time argued on how the battle between the gangs seemed one-sided, as the Sharks were shown more as victims.
Yes, you could make that argument, but as I said before, the cops don't treat the Jets well, and they have views on how women should be as well, like the scene with the officer and Maria. When I watch it, I see it as cultural differences and how boundaries have the effect on why the gangs hate each other, but I could be completely wrong. While the musical explores the theme of race and different ethnics and cultures, but there is one difference in my opinion that makes it slightly better for a modern audience compared to Romeo and Juliet, and that, of course, is the ending.
As many as you know, the ending of Romeo and Juliet has our two lovers commit suicide, and the prince delivering a speech to the Montagues and Capulets about what their hatred has caused. Now, before I jump to the speech, let's mention the leading towards the deaths. It comes from a misunderstanding, as Romeo believes Juliet is dead, as the message from Friar Lawrence describing the full plan never arrived to him. In West Side Story, however, Maria sends her best friend Anita to deliver a message to Tony, but she finds the Jets are also at Doc's store. They believe she is there to cause more trouble, as she is Bernardo's girlfriend, and so pretty much almost gang rapes her until Doc stops them. Now Anita, filled with hatred, tells that Maria is dead, which the news reaches Tony, and calls out for Gino to come and kill him, which he does, but then he realizes Maria is alive. To me, this death was somehow more tragic, as really it was caused by the hatred rather than just a simple misunderstanding. But the speech at the end of the musical is not made by the authority figures, but Maria, which is not only the Juliet of the story, but it combines all three of the themes I've mentioned. The speech that makes the two gangs realize what their hatred has caused is made by the young Puerto Rican woman, breaking the mold the cops wanted, and yet it is this character that changes the way the gangs see each other, and hopefully change for the better.
West Side Story is not just a faithful adaptation of Romeo and Juliet, but it works as its own piece for a modern audience. You can argue that yes, there are a lot of dated things about it and how things were filmed back then, as well it was in the 60s. But there were dated things in Romeo and Juliet as well, and that story's still timeless. Themes are still universal today as it would have been back then when Shakespeare wrote the play. So In my opinion, both are classics. And that concludes my review for West Side Story. Hope you enjoyed it, and I've spoken about a lot of musicals that are dramatic and have a lot of emotion, so how about for my next one I might do something light, something wild, something crazy, something mad, where you can really be what you want, you can just be it instead of dreaming it, and you can even shout out things to the characters, and oh, I know exactly which one I'm going to talk about. I will see you guys in the next review. Bye!